For patients with microsatellite stable colorectal cancer, we have not been really able to see any benefit from using immunotherapies for these patients. They're what we think of as immunologically cold tumors. And so a lot of research has been focused on, can we convert cold tumors into immunotherapy responsive tumors? And one study that looked at trying to do this was a study that looked at the combination of atezolizumab plus cobimetinib, which is a MEK inhibitor. Cobimetinib, we saw preclinically increase the intratumoral CD8 positive T cells and increased expression of class 1 MHC, suggesting a more immune responsive environment of the tumor. And then giving atezolizumab, the PD-L1 inhibitor, on top of it made a lot of sense to try to then drive the immune response. There was a phase 1b study that looked at patients with refractory colorectal cancer and saw some responses to patients with microsatellite stable disease to atezolizumab plus cobimetinib, and this led into a randomized phase 3 study which compared atezolizumab plus cobimetinib versus atezolizumab versus regorafenib. We were all very excited for this study as the first potential immunotherapy that might work for patients with microsatellite stable disease. The study enrolled very quickly and revealed its results back in June of 2018. And unfortunately, what we saw in this study was that there was no difference between giving regorafenib alone or cobimetinib and atezolizumab. So we think that cobimetinib and atezolizumab had some activity, it was just no better than regorafenib. So unfortunately, we didn't see any benefit with this particular combination, but there are a lot more immunotherapy combinations that are being looked at right now for these patients. When we looked at the safety and efficacy of the combination of cobimetinib and atezolizumab, we really didn't see anything different than the individual safety profiles. They were just combined on top of each other. We did see diarrhea from the cobimetinib as well as rash and some fatigue. Some people were particularly interested in the combination of atezolizumab plus cobimetinib for patients with RAS mutated disease. We know that the MEK inhibitors hit downstream of RAS mutations, so there was some thought that patients with RAS mutated disease may do better with the combination of atezolizumab and cobimetinib. Unfortunately, we didn't see anything significant to point necessarily that way. We're still doing a lot of biomarker analysis of the patients on this trial to see if maybe any signatures or there might be anything that would point out to a particular subset of patients responding better. But with the trial being so negative, we sort of hold that in reserve for now.
The subgroup of patients with MSI high, metastatic colorectal cancer, which amounts to about 4% of patients with metastatic colorectal cancer, tend to have a high mutational burden, is what we call tumor mutational burden high. Not all of them do, or not all tumor mutational burden high patients have MSI high. But there's a nice overlap between the two, quite significant overlap, and that's important to know. So patients with MSI high across the board, not just for colorectal cancer, seem to respond exquisitely to these PD-1 inhibitors, specifically pembrolizumab, who has been looked at in colorectal and non-colorectal cancer, as well as non-GI malignancies. And overall, the response rate was about 40+%, with a number of patients having complete responses. And these responses tend to be durable. In fact, for many patients, years and years of response and stabilities. And a lot of these responses eventually translate into complete responses, and some of the stable disease over time translate into PR. So that's an ongoing response. So in our clinic, everyone gets MSI high. Everyone with an adenocarcinoma gets checked for an MSI high status. And we also have the tumor mutational burden available as part of the genomic testing of the tumor. So we have these elements to help us decide who is that patient who should receive pembrolizumab. And in colon cancer, of course, that's about 4% of the patients. In my clinic, I actually tend to bring those PD-1 inhibitors earlier in the line of therapy rather than wait to later lines of therapy. The responses and the durability of responses that we see with these PD-1 inhibitors are unmatched by any chemotherapeutic regimens I've used in these patients, and therefore I hate to waste the opportunity of exposing these patients in the first line, if possible. I mean, the indication is for third line, and most folks do use it in second or third line because that's how it's dictated by insurance. But the reality is that a study is ongoing now looking at first-line pembrolizumab versus chemotherapy, and the realities are it's very likely that the PFS will be much more meaningful with pembrolizumab versus, at least historically, that's how I see when you compare the two versus chemotherapy.